Hi, Tamara. It's great to connect today. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
You've done a lot of work on meaningful work. And as you think about the things you have learned, what lessons would you most want to pass on to others?
I think there are three main lessons that I would hope that people would know. The first is that it's hard to have a meaningful life without meaningful work. The second is that every job can and I believe should be meaningful. And then the third is that leaders have a big influence in shaping the environment where people can find meaning in the jobs they already have. And they do this by what I call the three C's of meaningful work. So, building community, highlighting contributions, and then providing challenge.
It's easy for people to feel like my work sucks. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life, but I do have to show up to this 9 to 5 that I kind of hate. And I think and maybe it's for some people like that is just the necessity or that's the reality given their circumstances. Um, but I guess your point isn't that everybody has to have the meaningful work. Maybe your point is more specific, and I guess that's the ideal is we all get to meaningful work. But it is hard to have a meaningful life if that is the kind of job we have.
Yeah, it's meaningful work is a huge part of a meaningful life. We spend about a third of our lives at work. So we spend more time at work and with our work colleagues than we do with our family and friends. And so if the time that we're dedicating to work is drudgery and makes us feel like we're not making progress on meaningful work or meaningful things, or makes us feel like we have no connections and we're isolated, we bring that home with us, and it's very challenging for life to feel meaningful when so much time is spent in ways that don't feel meaningful. But I will say there's a huge misconception about what meaningful work is. And so a lot of people think meaningful work is the same as purpose-driven work. And so they think that is reserved for volunteer work or, social impact or nonprofit work or professions like teaching and healthcare. And what we find in our research and in the literature more broadly is that that's not true. Every job can feel meaningful.
Interesting. So this just makes me think of something. I've done some consulting with some real estate firms, and I've kind of experienced this where I will talk about my work teaching, and people generally kind of agree, like, "Oh, that's a meaningful thing. Like, how great you're educating." And then I'll talk about, doing real estate, and people are kind of like, "Oh, real estate? Like, oh, it's just business
Mhm.
and making money." And I think like the people I know in real estate, they're building homes for people. Like
Right.
that is like one of the most meaningful things you could possibly do is build a great home and a neighborhood and a community for people. And so I get this point of like people aren't seeing meaning where there is actually a ton of meaning to be had, I guess.
Yeah, it's all about the stories we tell ourselves. In the book, we start the book with the story of Keisha at Microsoft, and so she was somebody who was in one of our workshops during the height of the pandemic, and she worked in a data center in Toronto, and data center workers were considered essential workers because they had to keep the cloud running, right? We were relying more than ever on FaceTime and applications where we could communicate with each other while we were socially isolated. And so they were having a hard time. So Microsoft brought us in to kind of re-energize the workforce and kind of do some work around meaningful work with them. And one of the questions we asked right away was think about a time at work, and maybe your listeners can do that along with listening, is think about a time at work where it felt really meaningful. Think about that specific moment, that the story of that time. And, if you're a student, think about a time at school when you felt energized and engaged, and just like what you were doing was really meaningful. And then we had them share those stories. And Nate, the tenor of the workshop completely changed. Everybody was so energized. Telling your own story of meaning is really energizing, but then listening to your colleagues' stories of meaning is really energizing as well. And in that moment, Keisha had a flash of insight and she realized that keeping wires connected and cooling fans running was literally saving lives. She was not just connecting wires, but she was connecting people. She was helping doctors communicate and get the latest science, and she was keeping organizations running. And so that's the power of meaningful work. And again, it's not about connecting the wires. It's not about just being a data center essential worker, but it's about the impact of that work, the contributions you were making. And so with real estate is you're building homes for people where they get to raise their family, with the cloud work was, connecting people and allowing doctors and nurses to get the latest research and save patients' lives.
It reminds me of a story I heard. I think it was Amy Wisniewski discussing job crafting and talking
Mm,
about a cleaner at a hospital. And
yeah.
she viewed her work as like, I make clean spaces for people to heal. And
Yeah.
way more motivating, way more meaningful than, I'm a janitor. So you
Right.
talked about, okay, community contribution and challenge. So what role do those three things play in helping people find meaning?
Yeah. So community is the feeling that you belong to the community of your organization. You can show up authentically. Community says, I matter here. It's all about feeling connected, feeling that others care about you, and feeling that you can be yourself at work and that your strengths are valued there. Contribution is about understanding how what you do has an impact. And that impact can be on your colleagues, it can be on the customers you serve, it can be even on your family, because it can be just that you're providing financial support for your family. But it's really understanding what is the story of the work that I do. And so community says what I do matters. And then challenge, it's about learning and growing, right? As humans, we are wired to keep learning, to keep growing. And so it's about having somebody who believes in your potential and gives you challenging opportunities. And so challenge says, my growth matters here. And when those three things are present in our work, work becomes really meaningful. They don't all have to be present at the same level, but they all have to be somewhat present.
So if somebody's working at a job where they feel like they're lacking in one of those three areas, is the advice like go find a job where you can get those three things, or is it more change your mindset so you can identify those three things in your work?
It can be both. Some organizations, that are stuck in quote unquote toxic cultures, and it's very difficult to find the three C's when the environment you're in is not conducive to that. Our research was all done on leaders specifically, right? There's amazing research like the job crafting one you mentioned that is all done from the individual perspective. Like, how can I rethink my job, my relationships, the tasks I do? How can I change that or think differently about them to create more meaning for myself? Our research looked at the role of the leader, and what we found really surprised us because leaders are responsible for 48% of your experience of meaning at work. And so even though we can think differently about our job and create more meaning that way, it's really hard for work to feel very meaningful if leaders who shape that environment aren't helping us too.
Okay, something that I'm thinking of too is I worked at, I graduated from the Marriott School of Business. And when I went to law school, my scholarship was funded by the General Counsel of Marriott. I feel connected to Marriott. When I go on the road, I love to stay at Marriott. You've done some work with Marriott. What did you learn from collecting data from Marriott?
Yeah, we interviewed Debbie Marriott, who was amazing, and she really highlighted how much they care about their people and how much they invest in creating meaningful work opportunities across the board. I mean, they have 750,000 employees globally. So they were the largest organization that we interviewed. And then we interviewed her, but then we interviewed some people who work at different levels, and we zoomed in on the story of the Ritz-Carlton, which is one of their luxury hotel chains, and they really focus on giving people autonomy, and autonomy falls under the challenge C, which is letting people learn for themselves and be able to self-direct a little bit at work, because that really gives us opportunities to learn and grow and test things. And what they do is they give their team members a budget that they can use, at their discretion. And I think it's like $2,000 or $3,000, if I'm remembering correctly, per year. And they can use to make, a guest's day. And so one of the stories that's amazing is about a little kid who went on vacation with his mom. The dad had to stay behind for work things. And when they got back and were unpacking the car, they noticed that Joshie, the little kid's giraffe, was missing. And so the kid, and that was his lovey. He only slept with it. And so the parents, of course, I don't know, Nate, if that's ever happened to you. It's happened to
Yeah.
me when my kids were little. We had backups of the backups of the stuffed animals. But the dad, Chris, he called the Ritz and was like, hey, we left Joshie behind. And, I told my kid that he stayed back for a couple days vacation just to buy some time, but can you ship it back to me? And when they shipped it back, so Joshie arrived 2 days later, and he arrived with a photo album of Joshie's 2 days of extra vacation. So it was like Joshie in the spa, Joshie by the pool having a drink, Joshie. And that was amazing. There was no manual or policy that they did that, but because the team members have so much autonomy and they want to create memorable experiences for guests, they did that. And that's amazing. There's so many stories like that.
Such a great story. How fun would that be? And it's just like win-win all the way around. Just makes everybody happy and costs
Right.
so little.
Exactly.
Okay, maybe last question as we wrap up here. What role does gratitude play in trying to help people connect with either community contribution or challenge?
Gratitude plays a huge role in both community and contribution. If you think about it more, it falls more under contribution, right? Because you're acknowledging somebody's role, and you're highlighting what they did. And so if you're a leader and you say, "Hey, thank you so much for doing that report so quickly. I know that I didn't give you much time. We were on the tight deadline, but you really went above and beyond with X, Y, and Z, and I really appreciate your hard work." That feels really great to be acknowledged, to be seen. But the research finds that also when we express gratitude to each other and we recognize each other's efforts and accomplishments, the strength of our connection increases by 55%. So, gratitude, recognition, affirmation, those are all really important for our sense of meaningful work. And they don't cost anything.
Yeah.
There's research from Gallup and WorkHuman showing that a thank you from a manager once a week is so powerful that it reduces your intention to leave the organization. It strengthens your engagement. It increases productivity. So once a week, one thank you. It can take 30 seconds. So that's one very powerful way to increase meaning at work.
I interviewed Craig Crossland at Notre Dame, and something he said that surprised him as he became a leader was he said I manage very driven, motivated people. And I kind of had this perspective of leadership that I need to use the carrots and the sticks. And he said, over time, I realized the only thing I needed to do was just show people I appreciated what they did and get out of the way. And I thought that was a really interesting lesson that he learned. And maybe the last thing I'll share is at one of my research projects, we worked on amplifying others. And so what happens if, Jonah says something in a meeting, it's not listened to, and we can amplify Jonah and say, remember when she said that thing, it was great, and just acknowledge the contribution. And we found that not only does it help Jonah get listened to, but it also increases their status while also helping us. It just seems like such another very simple, low cost, really effective way to help people be more motivated, feel better about themselves, be part of the community and contribute. Well, anything else you would like to share just as we wrap up here?
You know, I have three kids. One's in college, the other two are late high school. And one thing that I hope, one big hope that I have for them in their future is that they not only experience their careers and their jobs and work as meaningful, but that they eventually create meaningful work for others as well. I think, you know, we each have a role and a responsibility to whether whatever level we are, we can make people feel seen and feel like they matter. We can highlight their contributions and say thank you, right? And we can help people keep learning. We can share things. And so I think that no matter what level you're at, if you think about the three C's in your life, you have influence on others and you can help create moments of meaning for everyone around you.
So great. Of course, I love this framework, community contribution challenge. So, on one level, we want to make sure we're hitting each of those for ourselves. But yeah, even better is let's figure out how we can help others have those things as well. Well, thank you so much for these lessons. I loved learning from you today, Tamara, and look forward to trying to apply these lessons in my own life.
Thank you so much for having me.